All right, we're here. We're talking about podcasting and books, right, Paula?
We sure are. It's so good to be back with you, Marion.
I just have one condition. Can we never ever start the show with yo, check it out or hey peeps or whatever those shows start with, the live shows?
Now I wish I could think of one. Hey, you guys, it's great to be back. That's
So
not one
today
of the things.
we are going to talk about some of our favorite books, specifically how they relate to content creation and how they've influenced our own work and how we coach others. And I think this is actually going to be, even though it's so fun to talk about books, I think this is going to be a really valuable discussion too, because there's so many great ideas and insights in these books. And we would also love to hear from you guys, or gals or people, what books have influenced you, because I think that could make it kind of a fun conversation. So, Paula, do you want to
Yes.
start with, we have a list, we have a whole pile of books, but what would you start with as a book that you think any podcaster or content creator should read?
Well, I mean, do you want me to pick the one we know we both love so much and show
I
that?
want to pick that one. Let me pick that one.
Okay, then I'm going to pick my all-time favorite right here, Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. And I know it's about creativity, but I would argue, and maybe some people don't have the same thought, but creating something week after week, such as a podcast, is a creative endeavor. And so I have found,
God.
man,
No, that's going to be our
yo,
opening.
chicas. There you go. We won't say everything that people post there, but we will say
we
yo,
might.
chicas. Yeah, we might. We'll pay each other afterwards based on what it was. No, I'm kidding. So Big Magic. Of course, there's also a podcast that Liz Gilbert did that goes along with this book. And I think the really important thing to me, and one of my favorite stories from this, or one of the favorite things that she says about creativity, is that ideas really come to flirt with people, right? I don't think she uses that word, but that, like,
wait, explain that to me. I don't understand what that means.
Sure. So, you get those ideas that just won't leave you alone. And you're like, oh, yeah. And it just keeps coming back again and again and again. And I've had it happen even for a name of a business. There's actually, I'm not going to share because it doesn't matter, but there's another podcasting business that has the same name as something that I was going to call mine. And I can't answer why that would, I'd never talk to the person about it. But it's that thing where things and ideas come, creative ideas start to come and play with you and dance with your mind. And it's your job to say yes to them. Or maybe not, but to acknowledge what's coming to you from kind of the creative beyond and acknowledge that it's yours. Like, it's asking you to bring it to life. And of course, she does talk more about how to say yes to those ideas, how to get, how to push, not really push, but how to deal with fear, because fear is a huge thing. I don't know. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a couple of these other books. And she also does, I believe, in this book, talk about. This isn't really. I do love Anne Lamott, and she wrote this great book called
Wait,
Bird by
you're
Bird.
on to your second book already.
Well,
No.
this is like a subset. So she talks about this idea that Anne Lamott came up with, which is that you have to get through the first crappy draft, and there's another word for that. We all probably know, but we're going to keep it clean here on this family friendly experience for the chicas. But
The
anyway,
chicas. Yeah.
But I think there's something about getting that first crappy draft out, whether it's your first episode and you just hit record and do whatever comes to mind. And then you're like, that's not what I want to put out. And you delete it. But at least you've pulled off the Band-Aid and you've got something that then you can work and iterate from. And I think those are a couple of my favorite, both that ideas come to flirt with us and that there are first crappy drafts that just need to be written and thrown out.
I love that idea of just like listening when those ideas just keep yelling at us. The universe is yelling at us. I am working on learning how to time when I put comments on screen when we're live. And so obviously I saw Grant's comment and I was so excited. I put it up right away, but really that was like interrupting you. So Sapiens, have you read Sapiens?
No.
So Grant says that it has some lessons about human nature that could apply to the human attention span. Okay, that's cool. Because actually one of the books we're going to talk about talks about our attention span. So if you're still around, maybe we'll get some insights from you on that. So I'm still, and I apologize for being distracted. We're using StreamYard, and I am kind of getting to know my way around here. So comments, I'm going to take that comment down, and I am going to put up one of my all-time favorite books, which is also one of your, yes, The War of Art. And I don't have a copy with me because I keep giving it to people. And what I think is going to be really interesting, Paula, is to hear what you have to say about the book and why it speaks to you and why it speaks to me and how I work with my clients with this book. And I saw, okay, we got a couple hearts on that book. It is such a classic book. And one of the things I love is the concept of going pro. And that's been something I have been thinking about a lot and working with my clients on a lot. In fact, I was on a podcast, I think yesterday, with Heather Parody, and I'm pretty sure I talked about this idea of going pro. And the idea to me, as it relates to podcasting, is that especially for people who are not comfortable being on camera or hearing their voice or whatever, that going pro is like being a professional at what you do means you just get over that. You get over that resistance, that feeling that, whatever it is, this is just part of the job. And if you want to be a professional, if you want to take your job seriously, whatever that is, for me, doing the coaching consulting, I need to put myself out there. This is part of the job, just like, sweeping the closet or stacking the, for whatever, the stacking the firewood. I don't know what the example is. You have to take it as a professional. And I've been sharing this idea a lot with clients, and I think it has helped some of them get over that discomfort. What's been your big takeaway?
Well, I do love the idea of resistance kind of being this force that we all come up against when we start to do something that matters to us. And resistance, Stephen Pressfield talks about that as being, kind of synonymous with fear. So resistance, I mean, it can be fear, and it's like the thing that gets in our way. It could be the imposter syndrome. It could be just, us deciding to do something that's fun instead of doing work. Not that anyone ever does that.
I definitely did not do that today. I definitely did not waste a lot of time making little book graphics when I should have been writing proposals today. Definitely not. And by the way, if you're watching this and you have read The War of Art and you have any thoughts about it, comment, please, because we want to hear.
Yeah. And I really also love, kind of related to what I was saying about Big Magic, is he talks about fear. And I just happened to open to page 40 here, where he asks, are you paralyzed with fear? That's a good sign.
Yes.
Fear is good, like self-doubt. Fear is an indicator. Fear tells us what we have to do. The more...
sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, the more scared we are of a work or calling, the more sure we can be that we have to do it.
Yes. There's a woman we interviewed for a podcast I produce. Her name is Laura Gassner-Otting, and she produces a lot of content. And she framed this idea in a way that totally clicked with me. And she said that, those butterflies you feel in your stomach when you're nervous? Yeah. She said she just trained her mind. And instead of those being a signal that you should back off, those were a signal that you should double down. She's like, if I feel butterflies, that means I'm going in the right direction. And so she just tricked herself into thinking that fear was like a good sign that she needed to keep going.
Yeah.
So how does that idea relate to content creation and podcasting?
Well, for me, I mean, it does mean that there's lots of times even when I'm working on one of my own shows, where there are 1 million things that come up in my head that I could do. And I have to say, no, those are distractions. That's resistance. Staying on focus. It can also look like gold plating, which is a project management term, but like adding all sorts of things to something before it can be good enough to go live. I think that's resistance. You have to find that sweet spot of when it's good enough, and, passion over perfection, like keep going, because you can stop yourself up. And I think, what else? I mean, so the other thing I love about resistance is it seems like it will often come into play in the form of things that almost seem outlandish. Like, it's almost like a test. And I mean this lovingly, of course, but there have even been times when people get sick, or, the power goes out, or like it's always this challenge. And then it's this I see those as invitations to get back into being a professional about it. Like, how do I handle this? I keep going. Sometimes it means you need to skip a week, but there's always a reason, and getting back on schedule or back to it is really important. And I think that's part of the war of art is there's always going to be things get thrown your
Yes.
way. And resistance comes up, and often in just, like I said, bizarre ways. And I love that he calls that out too.
And I love just the language that he uses. It's putting art in really like a way that challenges the way we think about it, because it's so easy to think of art because it's the creative world as something sort of soft and flowy, and like it takes work, and being
Mhm.
good at it takes work. And I think that's a big part of the message is like being a great podcaster, being a great creative of any kind takes a lot of work, and you have to be willing to do that. And if you think that it doesn't take work, you can. Oh, Rena has is that a raising hand? Or
I
is
think
that
it
a whoop
is.
whoop? Okay.
Or me too. I don't know.
Okay. Let us know which one that is. We're still new at this live thing, Rena.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like this idea that it takes work, it's an important message from both sides, because if you think it doesn't take work, then when you're not great at it immediately, you get disheartened and you give up. But
Yes.
really, it takes work to get better. And I actually have in my blurry board back here, which I'm hoping you can't read because it also has a list of things I need to do. But I have a quote from Pressfield, which says, "Most of us have two lives. The life unlived." Wait a minute. Most of us have two lives. The life we live and the unlived life within us. Between the two stands resistance.
Mm.
Isn't that good?
Yes.
If you think that's amazing, I hope you will like signal somehow on LinkedIn or Facebook, because I just think that's the most amazing quote.
I think so
that is
too.
amazing.
Yeah.
All right. So next, you want to do a book? Or you want me to
Sure.
do a book?
You can surprise me.
I'm going to surprise you. Okay. Oh, I'm going to surprise. Well, I'm going to surprise you with one of yours. Then
Mhm.
I'm going to surprise you, which I can't read that well. Oh, I'm going to surprise you with this one.
Brene Brown. Okay. So it might seem a bit like obvious. Okay. And for those of you who don't really know me, I know maybe you know Marianne, you don't know me so well, or maybe you do, but I've also studied as a life coach. So I'm certified life coach, and my background is in religious studies. So I kind of love that side of things.
But we
And
are talking about podcasting and content creation. This
bingo.
all relates. And this is actually, just to interrupt, because that's my MO.
It's perfect.
This is what's so great about our conversations is when it comes to kind of the end result, I feel like we're very well aligned, but we talk about the process in such different language. And that's why
Me
I think
too.
these conversations are so fun.
I love it. Yes, I do love it. And so the thing that I love about Brene Brown in general, like you could start anywhere, like what is Daring Greatly is a good place to start, but the Wilderness book to me was one of my favorite reads from her. And of course, she talks about shame and how kind of negative emotions, negative self-emotions can get in our way of things. And you probably see this, you'll see the themes here with what I talk about, but a lot of what I work with clients with is like, how do we get out of our own way, basically, to create the content that we are being called to create? And Braving the Wilderness. So Brene Brown has a favorite quote about what you do, and I'm going to paraphrase it. I think it's from Roosevelt, but about being what you do when you find yourself face down in the arena. And that's the part about daring greatly. How do you get back up? And this book about braving the wilderness is more about your time in the arena, if you will, or the wilderness, which means you're out there in the spaces that are scary and that you are unfamiliar and that you don't really know what to do with. And I think I've got a quote from this one. And let me see if I can find it. Otherwise, I'm just going to be clicking around.
No, while
best.
you're looking for the quote, I think I listened to some of this book in an audiobook format, and a big part of her conversation was about vulnerability. And I think that's also a big part of podcasting is, not falling into the trap of thinking that everything needs to be perfect. Like you and I talking about some of the issues with going live, the audience appreciates that and identifies with that. I mean, there's a place for an appropriate level of vulnerability as it relates to your your goal for the show. But I
Yes.
think there's a lot to be learned with using vulnerability as a tool in that way as you're podcasting or as you're creating content from her.
Yeah. Yes, for sure. And vulnerability is a really big part of that, of what she talks about. And she relates it back to data. So, because she's very much, she's driven by data and clinical studies and like that kind of information, and then layers this very interesting personal side of things onto what she publishes. So, one of the things she likes to talk about is true belonging. And she says, is the spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your most authentic self with the world and find sacredness in both being a part of something and standing alone in the wilderness. True belonging doesn't require that you change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. And I think the magic there is that so many times when we're creating a show, especially if it's deeply personal to us, is that we have to understand what it means to stand in that belonging and stand into and like speak whatever it is that we know we are called to this earth to speak about. And that can be really frightening and vulnerable. Now, I will say that this is not, I'm not advocating for the pull off the Band-Aid Geraldo type moments. Like, I don't, that's not where this is headed. It's finding that space and the space to share your voice. Because I got to read this one other one, is she also talks about our call to courage is to protect our wild heart against constant evaluation, especially our own. No one belongs here more than you. Because I feel like sometimes I need to tell myself that, like, nobody belongs here in this space more than me. And that's scary because, again, we get into talking about the imposter syndrome and how do I acknowledge that, but move into the uncomfortable space. And that is the wilderness that she's talking about. And I felt like I learned so much in that space listening to the book.
This is so interesting because it is like the voice that spoke to me was Pressfield saying like, turn pro, which is kind of like, get the F over yourself and just do it. Right. That worked for me. Whereas like all the, like whatever belonging in your tribe and all that stuff.
Yeah.
For you. Right.
Isn't that so interesting? Yeah. I love this. I love uncovering each thing under these stones as we go.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm going to go the opposite direction with one of my books. And it's Make Noise. And this one is actually very specifically about podcasting. It's by Eric Nuzum. I hope I'm saying that right. So I'm going to read a quote that perhaps will be controversial, but this is a quote from this book. He says, all listeners are narcissists about their listening. And why shouldn't they be? It's their time. They don't listen for any reason other than their own fulfillment and enjoyment, period. Right? This is what I keep trying to tell you. If your podcast doesn't serve a purpose for the listener, why would anyone listen? Like,
Yeah.
and the purpose could be entertainment or helping them fall asleep or education or motivation or stories or friendship, or like it can be all kinds of things. But if think about yourself. Why do you listen? There's always a reason. You don't listen like because I want to help the podcaster out, right? Right. So I think it's just so important to always keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it does, it kind of speak to why I also think you need like a mission statement, as we were talking about last week around purpose. Like, as the podcaster, you also have to very clearly understand what your purpose is in the space so that the listeners can understand what they're coming for. And that's why I'm not, and we can talk about it probably another episode, but like, or another session, whatever we call these. But that's why I'm not a big fan of some of the like really big umbrella shows where we're just talking about anything and, bros on a couch talking about life. Like, there's reasons that doesn't interest me, but I also think it's helpful for the listeners to understand what they're coming from, because in a narcissistic fashion, they just want to listen to what they want to listen to. And it'd be kind of like if Friends did an episode, about alien invasions. We might be interested, but like that wouldn't really interest most of us.
Correct.
Maybe it would. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that he talks about a lot in this book, and he explains in a way, I think better than I can sometimes to my clients, is how you should really identify your audience and know who you're speaking to. And sometimes it takes a while to discover that, but it's hard to have these conversations in your podcast that are valuable to your audience if you don't know who the audience is and what they're looking for, right? And it can change over time and develop. But one of the things he says really clearly, he actually asks people he works with to have such a specific image. Like, think about who that person is, right down to what they look like, and maybe even put a photo on your computer when you're talking, just to put that in your head so that you are speaking to that person, which is so valuable. And he points out that just because you're speaking to one person doesn't mean others won't listen too. But I think really thinking about who you're talking to and what they need or want. And again, like, I've been listening to Smart Less lately, which has been hugely popular. And it is one of those just like all about everything. What is the value it provides for me? It's almost like camaraderie. It's soothing. It's relaxing. It's like substitute for, being in a group of friends. So it serves a purpose. You just have to be clear about what that purpose is. And for me, that purpose is just sort of relaxation and company, when I don't have company. Whereas other podcasts, I listen to a lot of podcasts that are like about podcasting. And those are educating me and helping me prepare to work better with my clients and all those kinds of things. So the purpose can be different.
Yeah.
But it's got to serve a purpose.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you've pointed out there is that I am not the persona, the avatar for those folks that have the dudes on a couch. Yeah, like they're not aiming at me. But there definitely are some other shows.
We need to roll out the broadcaster term again. We used that last time, and we felt we had mixed feelings about that.
Mixed feelings. Is it a thing? It might be.
It's definitely a thing, but is that a negative stereotype?
I don't know, because I mean, well, we know that. No, I'm not going to jump there. Like, what would we call the other galcaster?
Yeah,
broadcaster.
Right. Yeah, we're not going to go down that.
So yeah, and I think the other thing there too is there are shows that I'm definitely interested in that are a little bit more of a smattering of lots of things. So I think it does depend. It's a niche interest thing though. Like, they got to hit something that I'm interested in. Oh boy, now it's time for Greg McKeown. I have an author crush on. Is that a thing? And can you still hear me okay? Yeah.
I can hear you. Yeah. Okay. So this book is called Essentialism.
Yeah. And he's written 2 now. So Essentialism was the first. And then just recently in this last year, he came out with Effortless. And I think they're a great 1-2 punch too. Again, these are books that I listen to, so I don't have a copy of them here to show you. But the thing that I love is Greg McKeown takes some of Tim Ferriss's ideas of like automation and what's the most important thing that you need to spend your time on, and really focus on that. And so why is this important for a podcaster? There's a lot of things that we could do, and we probably all have a lot of really fun ideas about the things that might fit into our show, or what social media strategy we want to follow, or any of those things. But really getting focused in on the things that matter most, which I think it might even be the subtitle of this book, is what is so important. And I think that's kind of the 80-20 rule of like 20% of the things will move your show 80%, whether that's growth or trying to find new guests or whatever it is. Like, he doesn't talk about podcasting in this book. Let's be clear. I'm putting that on there, but I think you can take so much from this book, and it becomes really interesting in how you look at what is the most important, most essential thing to do for your show or for your production or whatever it is. And then Effortless gets into the zone where he's talking about what are the things that are the easiest things for you to do and making them smooth and seamless. And one of the things he even talks about that is like knowing what your stopping point is on things. And we kind of talked about this a little bit.
Yeah, explain that to me. What does that mean?
But defining what done means. So my episode will be done when I cover these 3 topics, right? Or my show, my intro, if you're going for your first launch, like my trailer will be complete when this. So that gets into this space because I've also been a project manager for 20-ish years, but like defining what your project is, like what's the scope, and he talks about that in a way that is, it's reflecting on what makes it easy and what makes it effortless, because I think we get into that space where we're trying to add more and more and more to really like get the episode or the show to be like that much better. But he even talks about that there's that point where you're diminishing returns, where you keep working and keep editing or whatever, that you're gonna get that. So I love both the books. They're different, but by the same guy. And I think there's a lot of juicy things to learn from Greg
I think
McKeown.
I'm going to add that one onto my reading list.
He's a delight to listen to too. And I know a lot of us are audio, like we like to listen. So
double speed audio
He's
always.
good. Yes.
All right. So, my turn, I guess.
Yeah. What else
right.
do you have?
All right. I'm building a story brand.
Yeah.
Which is a book that everyone should read. I actually do have my copy here. This is a book that anybody in content should be reading. Anyone in marketing should be reading. They probably already have read it. Essentially, it's a framework for using story to convey a point. But the key element to me is that you should put yourself in the position of guide, not hero. So the customer is the hero and you are the guide, and you take them through this journey. And so this really helps you to understand how to convey your message in a way that focuses on the needs of the audience, to stay focused on the needs of the customer and the audience. And so it's all about, solving their problem, but they're the hero, you're the guide. It's really an essential book, an essential framework for how you think about story. And I'm always looking for the magic. You haven't seen that? Is that right, Lane? You're talking about this book you haven't seen? Is that the one you were giving the symbol for? Give me like a thumbs up if that's what you meant. But definitely, please read this book. So it's it will essentially shift the way that you think about your messaging, and it's something I'm always talking about when I'm interviewed, and people are asking about. Yes, he says correct. Yeah, so it is. I highly recommend it. So when they're thinking about, I'm interviewed about how do I grow my audience, how do I speak to my audience, how do I elevate the craft, and I'm always saying, think about your audience, think about what your audience needs, what your audience wants. And this book really helps get you into that mindset. And it also really breaks down story in a way that I haven't seen done so clearly before. Like we talked about The War of Art being one of those classic books. This is another one where there's so many marketing books, and I buy and I read a lot of them. And a lot of them have one point, and you could read that in the intro and then you could be done with the book.
Yeah.
But this book, I really felt like it was opening my mind, and I was learning stuff throughout the book. So highly recommend that one.
I have to pick that up. Yeah. I was in advertising until I was a podcaster. And so it's a delight to talk about how people talk about brand stories. I also feel like that kind of opens the door, and I wonder if they talk about it, but I feel like there are a lot of guests and hosts that want to be the guru, that are more prescriptive, and then they are inviting people into a story. Does that talk about that at all?
So much sense. Not in that context, but not exactly in that context, but I think it would completely apply to the way that you invite them into the story. I'm looking at all my underlined passages. I didn't pick one for this for today, but I'm going to just look to see.
Yeah, I just find that one of the things that I find difficult sometimes as a listener, again, narcissistic listener, but is that thing where people are telling me what I need instead. It's more of a tell instead of a show, meaning showing me their journey and talking about it in a meaningful way instead of telling me what I need, what they think I need to know from their journey.
Exactly.
And it's a very differential kind of way of explaining a story. But I think if you're planning on being a guest, it's also an interesting thing to study some of this too. And how do you present yourself on a show that's not, you're not taking over all the dialogue?
Oh, that's such a good point. As a guest, right? This would be really helpful as a guest from that point of view. So I'm still going to search a little bit for the relevant part here. One second.
Well, and maybe a future chat of ours should be how to be a great podcast guest.
Yes, Rory Fairbairns, who is a great podcast guest, posted something about that today. And he said he has been a guest on a bunch of shows, and he's finally realized he needed to do research and prepare and really elevate his role as a guest. The good podcast is as much about a good guest.
Yeah, so true.
I mean, just some key lines from this are just that, how are you helping your message is, how do you help the audience win the day, right? How do you help them win the day? The story is not about us, it's about them. I can't find a good quote. If I find one, I'll post it on social media tomorrow.
That is great. I'm gonna have to pick that up. It looks like a good one.
All right. So I'm going to throw up, I have the control here. So I get to pick the books, and I'm going to surprise Paula. I mean, these are books that Paula said were among her favorites that she wanted to talk about. I didn't just randomly pick them.
Full disclosure.
But she doesn't know which book that we think are essential books for any content creator, creative podcaster to read. She doesn't know which one this will be. So here we go.
I knew it. Okay, so this is The Princess Diaries by Meg Cabot. Okay, so it's a Disney film. That's fine. And I don't, so full disclosure, I don't really think that most podcasters should necessarily read this whole book. But I think there's something interesting that Meg Cabot talks about as far as fear. And this is truly, like, I love this quote so much. And it's this: courage is not the absence of fear, but the judgment that something else is more important than fear. The brave may not live forever, but the cautious do not live at all. Okay, so
it's like the man in the arena, right? You know that
it is. It's the same thing, which is, and I think sometimes we need to hear quotes in different ways to really let them land. Right, and so I think that's why, like, I love these kinds of quotes about, like, go do your damn thing. Wait, can we swear? And I think the thing is it feels really frightening when you're a content creator to, like, get in and really share the things that are the kind of the cutting edge stuff. Like, we could all talk about, and I'm not making fun. We could all talk about, how to become our most authentic self, or we could talk about, the top 5 things a podcaster needs to start a show. And I think these are conversations we can likely find somewhere else. So if you're a show and a content creator, what's the next level of that thing? And that's where the courage comes in. And so I think the thing that Meg Cabot's quote from this book means to me is that when we feel that sense of fear, we recognize, kind of like Stephen Pressfield even said, that it's calling us forward to do something else, and acknowledging that now courage, when it comes into action, is that thing where we decide the end result of a great episode or the end result of a show that pushes the envelope is more important than my own personal discomfort in this moment of talking about this thing.
Right.
Or figuring this out, or asking somebody to be on the show. Like, the courage and the end result is the thing that we should be aiming for.
Not the temporary discomfort.
Yes. So that's why The Princess Diaries makes the list.
I have a question for you about the clients that you work with. So would you say there's a higher percentage of these clients that you work with that are podcasting as a means of self-expression, or is it really a business? Is it part of their business?
It's part of their business. My client base are healthcare professionals and coaches, healers, and I think some of that, and talking, I call them heart-centered disruptors. So they're in a field where they're actually talking about things in a new way, and in a way that maybe the rest of their industry isn't. And so that means they're stepping into a place on daily of, I'm talking about this field in a way that's going to shake things up. And when you do that, you need to step into your Princess Diaries moment.
For sure.
You need to live into the courage that it takes to then talk about this thing in a new way. Because you're going to get some pushback. You're going to get some flack when you step out in that space.
Well, I have the thing, like, for me, it's not even the, I've never managed to talk about things the way everyone else does, just because I tried, when I was in middle school, I tried to be like everyone else and I couldn't do it. So I finally gave up. Yeah. And now that's finally an advantage. But the problem for me with the courage is there's a point where I'm like, really, like, who needs to hear this? Like, I just feel pompous, I feel like a know-it-all. I feel like I'm talking too much. And so that's really the turning pro part, where I was like, just suck it up. Like, you got to do this. This is your job. Who cares what people think?
Yeah. Well, and I bet sometimes, does it skirt up against that space of hero versus guide?
Yes. Yeah.
Where you maybe are stepping into being a hero for the audience. And then that's like, oh, wait, the guide would actually say this thing. Maybe that's a reframe.
Which is so hard. Yeah. That's so helpful. It's hard when, it's really easy when I work one-on-one.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
easy to be the guide. It's much harder to find that that line of being the guide when you are just talking to the world. At least that's what I've found. Actually, if anybody has tips on that, that's an interesting thing, that line between hero and guide. And how do you do that, right? When you're because I firmly believe it's what we talked about last session, right? Or
Yes.
show or whatever this thing is. My therapy session with you. No, your therapy session with me. No, the last time we talked about this idea that there's no one size fits all solution.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the issue when I work one-on-one with a client. It's really easy to really tailor an answer to what they need to hear.
Yes.
And it's really
Mhm.
hard to do something like this where the ideas are bigger and broader. I don't know. Is that too
Yeah.
esoteric? If you're listening, if anyone is listening, let us know if you have ideas, if you've dealt with that, if you've thought about that, or if you're just like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Who
Well, and I
cares?
think hero and guide, there's also sometimes when the guide needs to be really prescriptive, right? Like if you're talking how to get better sleep or whatever, then you need to, like, here's top 10 ways to get better sleep. Oh my goodness, look at this book. Look, I have it right here. You guys, this is my, hey chicas, this is my book. And really it was written about how to find joy. A lot of it came out of it's heart-centered ways to find joy in the messy middle. And in my last season on Jumpstart Your Joy, which is my my podcast, is I was talking about finding joy in the messy middle because the pandemic was this really kind of messy time, and I think many of us felt really detached from our joy. And so here's the thing: I feel like podcasting, I mean, is my joy. Otherwise, I wouldn't talk about it so much, joy or podcasting. And I also think that in order for you to be in a space that's creative, you often have to find your way back to something that you're highly engaged with, that brings you joy, and that you make time and space for. And I even talk about this on my second show, Joy of Podcasting, this week, of why you need a creative process to kind of dive into the space. It's not so much in this book, it's kind of there, but the idea being that unless we set up the time and space to engage with something that brings us joy, it's probably not going to happen. And so my takeaway from that, and it's in the book, but like, you're not necessarily like that idea that I'm going to wait till inspiration hits or until I have time, or I'm going to wait until any fill in the blank thing and that's when I'm going to record a podcast. I think that's
Yeah, you
so
can't do that.
misguided. Like it's
Right.
not going to happen. It might, but then you're not going to have a consistent creativity. And so I think
Right.
the thing is just like creating a practice of getting in touch with your joy, creating a practice to be in a space of creativity is really important as well. And so that's some of those ideas are in that book.
I want to acknowledge Lane. I know you corrected yourself where there is no prompt. Yeah, it's difficult where there's not a prompt, right? It's difficult to not do a one size fits all solution when you don't have that back and forth with somebody, right? So I will be putting Jumpstart Your Joy on my book list.
Thank
Do
you.
I get a discounted copy, maybe autographed copy?
I think I could send you one.
Okay.
Oh, look, it's Gabby.
Oh, good. Oh, yay. All right, let's see. What did Gabby have to say?
Oh, something about trolling. Uh-oh.
But folks weren't hella mean. Oh, got it. Got it. So that's the biggest fear for you is being trolled. Is that what you're saying? That's the biggest fear? Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one, Gabby. Oh, I mean, but listen, there's also the good side of comments, because honestly, Paula and I did this last week and we said, let's just try it, because she and I have these great conversations and we laugh about all this stuff. And, we love talking about it. And we thought, let's try doing it live and see what happens. And it might well have been a one-time thing if it weren't for you, Gabby. Like if you hadn't said, is this a weekly show? And then we're like, yeah, maybe we should try a weekly show. So comments can be a real positive as well. And I've found LinkedIn for the most part to be a good space. Do you accept comments on your shows? Explain what you mean. Do you mean like on YouTube, or, I mean, this show we're obviously accepting accepting comments. Yes, that is hilarious that you are the reason that
It went meta right there on your comments about why are we
it
here?
did go really
And
meta.
trolling. Not yet, but
Not yet.
yeah.
No
Well, and
trolling.
I don't. So I think I do allow comments. I mean, I guess I'm a little shocked because I started in 2015. I haven't. I mean, folks, now you know where to find me, and you could leave some sort of trolling message if you want, but I still love you.
Please
But
don't.
please don't. I haven't ever gotten a really terrible trolling message from
Well, now you're
anyone.
just asking for it.
I know. But I think the thing there too is we'll go again a little more on the woo side of this is I love The Work by Byron Katie. And she is someone who had a very life-changing event and realized that it is mindset that kind of changes everything for her. And so the questions that she would ask, and you can find her stuff at thework.org, I think, or it's just thework.com. But look up Byron Katie, and what I would ask is what they're saying true? And then ask, which is literally her other question, is it really true? Because I would argue that probably most of the times when you can answer, if it's true, then take it for what it's worth. Get rid of the troll piece and say, "Ooh, yeah, you know what? My sound wasn't that great that time," or maybe I could have been more clear. Like there's probably a nugget of goodness in there, but there could also be that invitation to be like,
this is about them. This is
about
not
them.
you.
Yeah. Because then the other two questions she asks are, who would you be if you didn't have this thought? Meaning, oh my God, these people are attacking me. This is the worst. Who would you be if you didn't have that thought? You'd be free is usually the answer. And then what if you turn it around? What if what they're saying is about them? And I think that's where the real
well, it's definitely about them in the sense that like it's a person with a disturbed problem when they go to trolling. But I think and bringing it back specifically to podcasting, this is actually one of the great things about podcasting. We talk a lot about social media, and social media is this two-way conversation, and podcasting, for better or worse, is actually not a two-way conversation. So podcasting is actually a place where there is no place for comments. You can try to generate them by asking people to reach out to you on your social media. But in some ways, I think that's a value of podcasting, is that it is a sort of a quiet space for you to come by. Probably already gone now. But it is a sort of a safe and quiet place for you to develop your voice and develop your ideas without any kind of without any comments, without any audience feedback that's direct. I think that's sometimes we overlook that. We think of that as a disadvantage of podcasting, but I think it might also be an advantage of podcasting.
Yeah, for sure.
So I have
and Gabby, Gabrielle, I'm sorry for calling you the wrong name, but like, don't let the fear hold you back. And, maybe some great books would be The War of Art and Big Magic. Like if you haven't checked those out, check them out because we want to hear your show. We really do.
Yes, for sure. I know. So I'm going to put Known up here. I'm going to go through it quickly. I'm just going to say this is a great book about personal branding, and it's by Mark Schaefer. And it just one of the keys to me is he explains it in better language than I can, and it's an audiobook, so I can't pull it up and pull the quote. But basically, the idea is your personal brand is not you. Your personal brand is the world's perception of you. And it's such a little difference, but it's such a big difference. And I think, he talks a lot about how you really need to have a personal brand in most areas of business now, and how you have this opportunity to grow your personal brand. But basically that it is not you, it's the perception of you. And I think that's my big takeaway from that.
I like that a lot because I know even I'm glad we can call you Gabby.
Yeah.
She's announced that yes, we can call her Gabby. But I think the thing that's so interesting is that about the perception of you, that idea, because I know so many people when they start a podcast, they're worried about how much they have to share or air quotes should share. And it goes back to kind of that. I think people are worried they need to share the Geraldo moments, the rip the Band-Aid off in front of people moments. And that's never true. But also really identifying for yourself, who am I as a podcast host? Because
right.
I don't even like my family. They will even say, "Ooh, you're using your podcasting voice." I don't
Yes,
I don't
yes.
articulate this way
My
when I'm
my
speaking to
my
them.
family calls it my Terry Gross NPR voice.
And so I think identifying all of that, like how do I speak? What do I speak about? How much do I share about my personal life? Like you get to define all that. And I think that's I'm going to have to read Known. I haven't read it,
Yeah,
but
and
that's what
I
it gets
think
me
that,
thinking about.
like, what we were talking about vulnerability, right? Um, it can be tactical. And so, like, with vulnerability, right? Like, in this conversation, it's appropriate for us to talk about fear and trolling and creative fears. That's an appropriate vulnerability. If I had some traumatic experience as a child, that might not be appropriate right now, right?
Right.
That's not the right kind of vulnerability. It's not like, so you can be real and be you,
Yeah.
but you don't have to share everything. And it
Yeah.
is always comes down to that perception. So
Well,
I'm looking
and
at
I
your,
feel like
sorry.
there's some funny quote about, and I'm gonna not have who it is. It might be Brene Brown. It might be like Glennon Doyle, but can I just share this one, which is about, sharing about your Brazilian wax is not vulnerable or always appropriate. So like you don't have to share those things. I mean, unless
Depending on the
your
concept
content.
of your
I
of your
like how we're
podcast,
both all
right?
like,
Well, it's right. There's no blueprint. There is no one size fits all solution. Now, for me, on the Grounded Content podcast, that would not be relevant
no.
at all.
Joy of
At all.
podcasting. Jumpstart
Not
your
relevant.
joy.
Right.
No
Not
Brazilian discussions.
relevant.
Just here.
Spartan Up, the show I produce, not relevant. Although we are all about resilience, and that does, there is some toughness and resilience involved there, I would guess. Okay, changing the subject quickly. So I have one more book on my list. I don't think you have any more on your list, but I will say you asked me to come up, sort of like Princess, the Princess Diaries, with one that would be sort of unexpected.
Yeah. What is it?
So right. So first I'm going to do like my little recap, right? I had building a story brand, super like just meaty, right? Make noise, totally on topic. War of Art, just super, super on topic. Okay, here's this one. Endurance. It is about Ernest Shackleton. And this is the most incredible story. It's a survival story. And this ship was caught in the ice in the Arctic, and every single person survived. But the things that I like about this book that relate to what we're talking about today are, number one of the sort of ideas of this book is that the thing that allowed Ernest Shackleton to survive this ordeal and to get through it with every single member of his crew alive was optimism. He was stupidly optimistic. So he always had, I mean, his friends, his family, they said like, he's an idiot. He's so optimistic, but he never gave up hope.
Yeah.
And if you don't keep trying, if you quit too early, that might've been the day, right? The day that, that things worked. And so that was just this, tremendous optimism. And I think that can be easy to write off as, it could be easy to write off as not a useful skill, right? Optimism, hope. These are these kind of fluffy, airy kind of things. But in the most absolute sort of survival situation, optimism is what kept these people alive. So I think having that hopefulness and that positivity and that optimism when you are creating your content and not giving up too early, not feeling like hopeless, which it can be. You publish episode 15 and I can tell you every single podcaster that I talk to, the first question is, how do I grow my audience? And most of them come to me and they're kind of embarrassed to say how small the audience is. And they feel kind of hopeless about it. And then we have to talk about really what are their goals? What are they trying to get out of the show? Right. And how do they serve those goals? And how does the number of downloads relate to that? And how can they increase that? Or should they be looking at a different metric? But having that whole conversation, but it's just so easy to give up hope. So I think that was my message for my unexpected book.
I love that. Yeah. And I
Gabby
think
says, I could watch the film. It was too sad, but I'm happy they all lived. It's unbelievable. This is not like one of those everyone had to eat each other or something books.
Donner Party,
The
unfortunately.
other really cool tactic is when somebody is really having a hard time, ask them to help. So that was how he kept one of the crew members engaged, was kind of giving them more responsibility. So
That's interesting.
yeah.
I feel like there's a bookend story for that, and I think it's an Effortless by Greg McKeown, which I talked about, and he talks about how I think it was 2 ships with different teams left to go. I think Antarctica or somewhere dangerous, but one of them didn't make it because they kept pushing and pushing and pushing as hard as they could every day, sailing 12 hours a day, barely resting, and then storms started to hit, and they had worn down themselves and their ability. The other team had a plan, and that was they would sail no more than, I think it was like 6 hours a day. They would all sleep and rest, and it was, I mean, it's the tortoise and the hare, right? Like, but it was through having this plan that they made it through those storms, and they all survived. And they didn't break any records. Or
bring this back to podcasting.
I think it matters if you have a plan. It's a slow and steady wins the race. I mean, that unless you have an idea of, I mean, you do have to be thinking 2 or 3 episodes ahead almost all the time. You have to be, if you're an interview show, you got to be asking for the interviews well in advance. You probably have to have a couple of evergreen episodes in your backlog that you can pull. Maybe you're pre-recorded and ready to go in case something doesn't happen. But like really having that idea that this is a marathon and not a sprint, and treating it as such, that you're not just going till 3 a.m, to get the next episode out because you didn't plan ahead. So I think there's that piece, and I love that they're both boats. Like, how fun.
And I would say even, one of the things we've talked about is it's not only, people say it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. I would say it's an ultra race. It's an endurance race. An ultra is like anything over a marathon. But I would say it's an ultra race.
Yeah. Well, I'm really super being honest with, like, how long is your season? Is it a year long? Maybe it should be less, I think looking at all the variables too and seeing what can you control and what can't you control. We could go into all this in another episode.
Yeah. So I would say, I think we should recap. Like, let's each go through real quick what all the books were that we thought were essential, and kind of a short version of the lesson. And then any comments that you have, if you're watching, about, something you want us to talk about next time, please come up with something so we don't think that you don't want us to ever come back. I mean, we might be here anyway, whether you want us to or not. But Paula, why don't you run through and I'll see if I can get the banners up on screen in time.
Yeah. So Big Magic by Liz Gilbert really talks about how to say yes to those creative dreams that are coming to play with you, and how to bring them to life, and how to play with fear. We also talked about Effortless and Essentialism by Greg McKeown, which are focusing on what matters most, and then also finding ways to make them really easy and to get into flow and make things happen. Relating to podcasting, about make sure you're focusing on what matters most with your show and your production and your promotion of things. And then if you can find ways to automate it or do it easier, do it. Take advantage of that stuff. We also talked about Princess Diary. Braving the Wilderness. Just really understanding that, going into a podcast creation, you are going to be out there on your own in some ways, creating your own content, stepping into spaces where you need to be brave. And that's its own wilderness, right? Like, nobody's done what you're doing ever before. So at least around your content and your voice. So that's stepping into a brave space and learning how to be out there and share your own message. Princess Diaries about courage and fear, and how getting through and past the fear of sharing your own voice, and understanding that on the other side of that is what matters more than your fear in this moment. In my own book about really cultivating a practice around finding what brings you joy. And I think creativity is the same thing, finding a practice for your creativity, so that it's not just when it hits or when you're inspired. Like, you really have to craft that. Julia Cameron, also in The Artist's Way, I just threw in a new one.
That was
She
another one.
talks
I
about
almost
it.
put that on my list. That was on my backup list.
It's a surprise hit. No, I'm just kidding. But she talks about taking yourself on like an artist date. So you get new
Yes,
ideas. You
right,
have new things
right.
coming in. But yeah,
It's a
thank
great
you.
one. That's a good one. That's a good one. All right, and then I'll go through mine real quick. The War of Art, which was like the winner for both of us, and it's really about getting out of your own way, understanding that being a creative, being a podcaster, being a writer, whatever that is, it takes work, and you should expect that work, and you should embrace that work and get it done. And then I talked about Known, which is a book by Mark Schaefer, which is all about personal branding. But the piece that I really took away was that your personal brand is the world's perception of you, not you, right? And then we have Building a Story Brand, which is really, really just like a meaty, chock full of information book that really gives you a guide on how to tell story. And I would say the essential takeaway is that you are the guide, not the hero. And then Make Noise, which is the only book on either of our lists that's specifically about podcasting, but really talks about getting clarity on what is unique about your show, like what its mission is and who you're speaking to. And I read that quote about the narcissistic listener, which is great. Like, just keep it in mind all the time. People listen for their own reasons, not for your reasons. And then I think that was it, except for Endurance, which was just, don't overlook the power of optimism. This is a story of a ship that was trapped in the Arctic ice, and every single member of the crew survived because, in part, the leader was super optimistic. So that's it, right? Are we ready to wrap? I think that's it.
I think
Well,
so.
thanks for listening. And if you have any suggestions for topics, leave them in the comments. And, I think we'll probably be here at 3:30 next week.
I think it sounds awesome. I feel like we could talk about what makes a good podcast guest, or we could talk about the role of a host as hero or guide, and when do you jump between the two? Like, I would love that discussion.
Yeah. I think people being I'm gonna lean towards guest, but we'll see. You are welcome. Thank you for watching.
Yeah, I think that was Gabby.